Jewish by the new taxonomy, was sent to England alone at 12. His less Jewish cousins, who remained in Germany, no longer had any idea who they were.
This room, I remember, was the last classroom in 1942. And at the beginning of every term, pupils had to fill in a sheet which was given to them the first day, and they had to fill it in. And the last question was, are you Aryan? Yes or no? I knew I was not Aryan, but I didn't exactly know to what extent, to what degree. And then I thought, what should I write? If I am a quarter of a Jew, I could really write yes. If I'm 50-50, I can as well say yes, as well no. So I prefer to write yes. And then the teacher, she was really a big person with a great bosom, and on the bosom was a Parteiabzeichen, the Parte badge. And she gathered all the sheets and went before the class here and looked at them. And I got very worried about it because I thought, what would she say? And then she said, Bergengrün, kommen Sie nach vorne. So my birth name is Bergengrün. And I was put here. Then she said, you have not truly answered the last question. And from now on, my classmates knew my flaw.
At an age when most children are making lifelong friendships, Ria was isolated and shunned. The more words that were written about the different classes of Mischlinge, the more they escaped definition. A century earlier, dealing with the prejudices of his own day, Felix recognized the damage words could do, which is why he called some of his most famous works songs without words.
Here's Mendelssohn's first song without words that he published from 1832. He believed quite firmly in the expressive nature of music, and he thought music was more definite than words. Words for him were ambiguous.
Mendelssohn realized that music could speak a much more universal language. He wrote, "True music fills the soul with 1,000 better things than words." Soon after discovering she was Jewish, Ria moved away from Munich. But the family's troubles followed them. The Jewish flaw became a matter of life and death.
The problem about mixed race people was that if you had enough Jewish blood in you, then you had to be taken to a concentration camp and killed off. But if there wasn't quite so much, then things were better.
So it all came back to blood, and the job was to prove your blood was not Jewish.
It is called Ahnenspiegel, what means a mirror of the ancestors. And I'll show you, it is the handwriting of my father. He filled it in. Number 7 is the mother of my grandmother, Gertrud Hensel, who was Jew. There is not written her name, only Jew. Was not worth writing the names. And the numbers 14 and 15 are the great-great-grandparents, Jakob and Fanny Adelsson. This was only written Jew.
Suddenly there was a glimmer of hope. Fanny von Adelsson had been an orphan, a foundling. Nobody knew her history. If she could be shown to have been Aryan, it could change everything. And that one ancestor could make the difference.
Could make the difference if my grandmother should be deported to camp or not.
A mad genealogical treasure hunt began for evidence of the orphan family's Aryan credentials. All over Germany, part Jewish families were doing the same thing. A special office, the Reich Genealogical Office, was set up to assist them, and entire books were written about where to look and how to lodge your petition. Missing one detail could be disastrous.
This book is called the Abstammungsnachweis and shows in enormous detail all the requirements for producing the different forms of racial adjudication.
Der Abstammungsnachweis, what means proof of descent. Yeah, proof of descent for the Mischlinge.
You have the full racial certificate, the small racial certificate.
The employees at the local offices could read about the uncertain cases and they had to inform them with this book.
In his lifetime, Felix came to believe that his own Jewish and Christian loyalties didn't have to be at odds. His second oratorio, Elijah, written 10 years after St. Paul, reflects both readings of the Bible.
Elijah is a work that really could be seen from two different perspectives. On the one hand, if you're a Christian, you could see this as a work where the Jews once again rise up against Elijah and show themselves to be unfaithful. But on the other hand, if you're looking at it from a Jewish perspective, you have this wonderful chorus at the very end of the work, sung by the angels, in which they declare, "Go, return upon thy way, for the Lord yet hath left him 7,000 in Israel." In other words, there are 7,000 Jews that have remained faithful despite all of this. And in this kind of atmosphere, that's a real triumph over adversity. So this is a story with a happy ending. Early in his life, Mendelssohn really works to try and separate himself from Judaism in his oratorio St. Paul, just as his father would have wanted him to do. And then later in his life, Mendelssohn really tries to find a balance between his Christian faith and his Jewish past.
With Elijah, Felix seemed finally to have achieved his grandfather's ambition to reconcile the Christians and the Jews. The year after Elijah's first performance, Felix was dead from a series of strokes at 38. His death was an international tragedy. But barely a year later, the backlash began, seeded by Felix's near contemporary, Richard Wagner.
You've got to remember, by the time that Mendelssohn died in 1847, Wagner was a kind of minor composer. He'd written The Flying Dutchman, but he hadn't had really great success. And he was jealous of his rivals, two rivals in particular, Mendelssohn and Meyerbeer. And he gave vent to his kind of jealousy in his notorious article, Jews in Music. And he really lambasted Mendelssohn, saying that, you know, he was an extraordinarily talented musician, but not one who was able to be original in any way. And he said that the reason for his lack of originality and depth was because he was Jewish.
And then, you know, of course, people start criticizing. And you have one critic who goes, he's rather a bad composer, and then all the others start bleating. And soon there's a whole sort of field of musicologists and music critics who bleat one or after another. It does happen with sheep. And then we are told that Mendelssohn was not a great composer.
The campaign begun by Wagner came to fruition 90 years later with the Nazis.
Wir haben ein deutsches Theater, einen deutschen Film, eine deutsche Presse, ein deutsches Schrifttum, eine deutsche bildende Kunst. Der früher oft gegen uns vorgebrachte Einwand, es gäbe keine Möglichkeit, die Juden aus dem Kunst- und Kulturleben zu beseitigen, weil deren zu viele seien und wir die leeren Plätze nicht neu besetzen könnten, ist glänzend widerlegt worden.
Here's where the next part of the story comes in. The Nazis couldn't obliterate Jewish music, but they could confine it to the Jews. To himself, Felix may have been a religious mongrel like the rest of the family. To the Nazis, he was unquestionably a Jew. The fate of his music now became entwined with that of the whole Jewish population of Germany. Klaus Moser was 10 years old when the Nazis came to power. His parents were Jewish bankers in Berlin.
One of the central things in my family life, happily, was music. I was a young pianist, my brother played the fiddle. Music was central. My parents took us to endless concerts and operas. And they had a wonderful scheme. They would never let us stay beyond the interval. So we always wanted more, quite a good wheeze. But gradually, one was more hesitant to go out to concerts. The Kulturbund was undoubtedly a savior for us, for families like ours.
The Kulturbund was rather interesting because it was actually the first cultural organization that the Nazis created. It was created with cooperation from the leading sectors of the Jewish community in Berlin as a way of keeping the Jews happy. It was only open to Jews, no Aryans were allowed to attend, so it was in effect a kind of cultural apartheid.
For the Nazis, the Kulturbund, or Jewish Cultural League, had another purpose. It provided images they could send around the world, showing that the Jews of Germany were fine.
Oh, look at these, honestly. These could be my family. I mean, they're not, but so typical. And they're smiling, queuing, smiling.
Initially, the Kulturbund's repertory included all the classics of German music. But that soon changed.
Well, at first, of course, the leaders of this Jewish cultural organization had high hopes that they would be able to perform all the great classics of German music. But eventually, step by step, their rights were taken away from them.
Certain composers were not allowed to be performed by the Kulturbund. Wagner, I seem to remember, Brahms, I think, Bruckner. Why? Because having Jews listening to their music would pollute their music. Not Jews being forbidden to play it, Jews being forbidden to listen. Just think of this. Jews were not allowed to sit there listening to that music because it would pollute the music. It really, it's sort of beyond one's understanding, really, how that can come about, but it did.